So we're in our final week of the series. I wish that our room was so full that you couldn't get in here. I wish that we had to put on a 7 p.m. service and maybe a 3 p.m. service, that our church was just jam-packed full of Christians. But that would be okay because there's another church just down the road, maybe almost across the road in the family community centre there. And I just wish this became almost a Bible Belt where it was the kind of place where someone moves here and thinks, oh, there's just so many Christians in Bondi. And what's with all the churches? There's so many of them. They're kind of running everything around here. I wish there was Christians flooding Bondi. I wish that there was so much money coming into the offertories at church that we didn't quite know what to spend it on, and we had to say to people, slow down, because we've already paid for the minister and we bought new light fittings, and there was kind of too much, and we had to give it away or tell people to slow down. Or there was so many people here that just within a few thousand people that were part of our church, there was so much giftedness that Martin and I would we'd be kind of lower on the rungs of giftedness, and we just have to kind of hand the work over to other people who were just much more competent than us. And I don't wish that because I want to have a sense of a big church. I wish that was the case because I think Jesus is the best news for anybody. And I wish there was just a flood of Christians with the good news of Jesus, living it out in their own lives and handing out wherever they go in Bondi and bringing it to all the fun endeavours that happen in Bondi, the companies that get started and the life-saving, as Martin mentioned, and there's so many, and kind of the food industry is kind of, I think, particularly pointy here, and I just wish that Jesus was brought into all those things and brings what he always brings, which is grace and truth into those things. But we're not. We're kind of small, aren't we? 20-something, I reckon, tonight. Good night, 20-something. And same this morning, pretty small up the other church. But wherever Jesus went, people did crowd like that. We see it here in Luke chapter 5, that Jesus is teaching on the side of a lake, by the side of a lake. And as always happens when he teaches, people flock to Jesus. Do you remember in Mark chapter 2, it's one of my favorite stories, where Jesus is teaching inside a house and it gets so full that people are kind of crowding in, and no more people can come in. And so someone really wants to get in. So they dig a hole in the first century Near East roof and make a hole above Jesus as he teaches and lower their friend down to get in the roof. There's just no room. Wouldn't it be great if there was people kind of out in the backyard there who couldn't quite make it in, but they could still listen to the word of God and sing with us from the garden? And here by the lake, Jesus is teaching and people are crowding. And it says in the first 2 verses that he goes and hops in a boat. I guess the crowd was so big that he's starting to get muffled out by the person in front of him. And so it says in Luke chapter 5, and you might like to flick back there, please, Eli, that he goes and hops in some boats that were on the shore and asks the fellow Simon to take him out a way. And I think he's just sorting out the acoustics. He's getting a bit of space back and maybe a little bit of elevation in the boat from the crowd of people so that he can address the crowd. Really, why do people flock to Jesus? And even though we're small in Bondi, people have flocked to Jesus for 2,000 years since he first started teaching. And in other parts of the world, they're still flocking. In China, they flock to Jesus. There's not enough room. Why is it? It's because of his message. We're at the start of chapter 5, but at the end of chapter 4, he tells you what his message is. It says at the end of chapter 4, right at the very end, it says that Jesus went to a solitary place just to, I think, have some Sabbath time away from the work that he was doing with crowds. But the crowds follow him and they say, want you to come back and talk to them. And he says, I've got to keep going on to the next village. And he tells you what his message is, the message that delights people. He says, I've got to keep preaching the good news of God's kingdom. Now, that sounds like an old-timey phrase, right? Good news of God's kingdom. But if you know Jesus and you know what he means by good news of God's kingdom, it is, as I said, delighting. And I wonder if we're small in the West and in Sydney because Christians, as Kaz was praying about, have dropped the ball and we act like we don't have good news. We don't treat people as though it's good news. We treat people with judgmentalism and we hurt people. Instead of being bearers of good news, we're being bearers of bad news in lots of ways. But places where it goes fresh, where Christians haven't kind of messed it up yet, it's the delighting news. the good news of God's kingdom. Slow that down to the two parts there that Jesus talks about. What is his message? Good news of God's kingdom. It's about the kingdom. It's about that there is someone in charge. If you look around the world, and if you look around your own life, or if I look around my life, oftentimes, it doesn't look like someone's in charge. It looks like it's falling apart. And yet Jesus says, no, God is in charge. I tell you, he is. He's holding things together, and he'll keep things right. And he'll make things right. As wrong and broken and out of order as they are, he will bring them together and it'll be good again. Jesus was speaking about God's kingdom. And he'll judge what is wrong. And he'll put down those who have done injustice and hurt people. It's about God's kingdom. But it's also good news. Because Jesus brings that kingdom in with grace and with kindness and with beauty. It's about order and justice, and it's about that thing coming with a kind of goodness. And there's this is a kind of a paradigm that you'll find everywhere in Jesus: grace and truth, kingdom and good news. Die on the cross to save you from your sins, risen as the Lord Jesus from the dead. That's one more I want to tell you about. Oh yeah, Jesus is Lord and Savior. This is kind of just a paradigm that you'll find everywhere in Jesus: grace and truth. His message is of the kingdom and its good news. And so people flock to Jesus. He hops in the boat. But that's not quite what Luke wants you to focus on here, because he very quickly skips over the preaching in the boat and says, then Jesus finished his teaching and said to Simon, who must have been in the boat with him rowing, put out a little further, put down your nets, you're going to catch some fish. And Peter says, and you can imagine, right, if you've been labouring in a boat all night trying to catch fish, you just put it on the shore. This guy, he was admittedly pretty delighting and interesting, asked you to put out a few metres. So you went out a few metres, and you think that's all. And he says, no, let's go fishing now. You don't want to go back fishing after being out all night, especially when you haven't caught anything. But Jesus says, no, we're going out and let down your nets. Simon Peter lets down the nets, and there's a miraculous, ridiculous, wild catch of fish. It's breaking the nets, and the nets are full. Like our building would be full and kind of stretched to its limits and its capacity. The nets are full of fish, and they begin to break. And Peter calls his friends in the second boat, and they get the fish in the boat, and it's beginning to sink the boat. Just like, again, the building would be limited in all sorts of ways if we got inundated with people who wanted to follow Jesus. And the rosters would be all blown out of proportion, wouldn't they? Oh no, the rosters aren't working because there's too many people, and the accounts we'd have to do them differently, right? If there was lots of people. In the same way, the nets are just absolutely full. But did you see Peter's response? Really interesting. And it slows you down in the story. It's kind of this, I don't know, almost like a little miracle story. But then Peter says something that stops you in your tracks. He says, go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. I find it such a poignant moment where I get a sense of what the Lord Jesus would have been like to be in his presence. He would have shocked you sometimes like that into a kind of a quietness that would make you want to say, go away from me. I'm a sinful man. Why is that his response to a miraculous catch of fish? It's kind of fun story, miraculous catch of fish, and then very kind of somber. And it's because it's not just a trick or a party trick or a really cool miracle. It's a revelation of God's kingdom come and as good news. It's a revelation that this one is God's agent of the kingdom, who is in charge of even the fish and can bring things in whenever he wants. And I want to draw your attention to Jesus tonight and say, he says it with his words, God's kingdom, and he shows it with the catch of fish. He can bring things in your life under his command. Whatever feels like it's waving out in the wind, or an empty boat after labouring for all night or 6 months or 6 years, God can bring it into control in an instant. And what Peter sees is that that not just God does it out there, but this one is God's agent. This one is the Lord in front of me. And when he realizes it, he says, Lord, go away from me. Why? Because I don't belong with that one, with the kingdom. I'm a sinful man. Jesus says, such a beautiful thing that you must take home with you for tonight as you go to bed, for those moments when you wake up at 3 a.m. a bit kind of just existentially frightful, and for the really hard seasons, and for dying. I've only been in ministry for 7 years, and I've sat with a few dying people. And this, what Jesus says, is so beautiful for those kinds of moments. Jesus says to Peter, who says, "Go away from me. Don't be afraid." Isn't that very beautiful? To people who lack holiness like me, to people who are selfish, I find it very easy to look after myself and think the worst of others and the best of me. Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. Come follow me." And Peter goes and follows him. But Jesus says a very strange thing next. He says a beautiful thing, don't be afraid. And then he says a strange thing, I'm going to make you fishers. I'll make you a fisher of people. The old patriarchal way to say it is fishers of men, but a better way to say it rightfully is fisher of people. It's such a strange phrase to try and hold in your head, a fisher of people. Because when Jesus calls you to him, who is the agent of God's kingdom come and on it, and which is good news, he calls you to call other people and bring them into that. It's not the kind of thing you can keep. You must not keep that to yourself. And so Jesus says, "Follow me, I'll make you a fisher of people." And that's just our job. And I'm not saying me and Martin, the paid ministers, me and Martin and Matt Graham, the paid ministers, and Sarah looking after the little soul people. That is anybody who follows Jesus, you're a fisher of people. That's part of our walk with Jesus, is to be so in love with him, because he's the Lord, that we fish for other people, we try and bring them in. And the question becomes, how are we going to do that? How will we fish for other people? And that's the beauty of what Matt Graham, our other pastor upstairs, has led us through this series, saying, how are we going to do it? What are the actual things we can do to bring people in to Jesus? Because the church has done it poorly in the past. They're like, let's just go with one of the worst, which is in the Middle Ages, sometimes Christian countries, there is no such thing. There's only such thing as a Christian person. But Christian countries would go to another country, kill a bunch of people until they stop resisting, and then just kind of throw a bit of water at people and baptize them, as though that made them Christians, even if they couldn't speak the language and didn't know what Christianity was. Okay, so that's like probably about the worst. No, that is the worst. That is not even fishing for people. That's actually evil. But how are we going to do it? And we've mentioned a few ways that you could or might not want to do it. There's the stand on the steps of town hall and yell it. And again, I won't throw mud at that, because I'm sure they've led people to Jesus. And actually, just recently, I got a phone call from an organisation saying, "Hey, can we come and teach your people how to walk up at Bondi Beach?" And I said, "Tell me about what you're doing." And wow, that sounds exciting. I'm going to pray for you, but no, thank you, because we're going for a different model at the moment. We're just about to do a series. And so I said, no, we're not going to just walk up to people and say, "Hi, can I talk to you about Jesus?" We're going to do bless. Begin with prayer. So I hope if you follow Jesus, if you're not a follower of Jesus, welcome. I hope you just enjoy being with us and listening in to what Jesus is about a bit. But if you're a follower of Jesus, I really hope that you're praying for your friends to get the good news that you have. I hope you're listening to them. So you're understanding what's going on in their hearts and what things bother them about the world, how they see the world as out of order, because they'll see things that you missed, and notice the unorderedness of the world. And so, yeah, that's important. And I hope we're eating with our friends. Remember, I challenged us a few weeks ago, eat with someone you don't normally eat with who you want to, and eat with someone you don't normally eat with who you don't want to, just to bless them. And we serve our friends and our enemies. And here we are tonight with the final S is, if you do those things, people will ask you to share with them about Jesus. I can say that with authority because I've seen it happen. It takes longer than I expected, but it does happen. If you do those things, people will say, "Tell me about Jesus." And they'll say it as simply as that. I'm going to tell you about three. I had a friend at uni, and when I was, 18, 19, I was super extra keen about Jesus, maybe a little more keen than I am even now. And I just wanted people to come to Jesus, like just come to Jesus recently. And so I really wanted to headlock people and tell them the gospel and ask them if, should I baptize you while I have you down here? But my friend, wise friend, said, no, dude, I didn't know bless, but it was this kind of thing. Just listen to people, you'll get an opportunity. And it took ages. And I'm praying for my friends to share. And then one day, just out of the blue, my friend had something really hard happen on the weekend. He comes to you on Monday, says, like, how do you have hope? Just out of the blue, as simple as that. How do you have hope? And so I got to share with him. He trusted me. He knew that I knew him and that I wasn't going to beat him over the head with sin or something like that. And I got to share with him. Beautiful. It was a beautiful moment. I'm laboring the point to say, if you bless your friends and don't miss prayer, you might think to yourself, oh, I'm nice to people, good, but are you asking God to be nice to people, to come into their life powerfully? He will do it, and they'll ask you to share with you. And that gets us to the start of tonight's sermon, which is how are you going to? I promise I'm joking. But it gets us to the point. But I want you to feel the point. That's why we're late, because it gets to the question: what are you going to share when they say, "How do you have hope?" Or when they say, "What should I read in the Bible?" Or when they say, "What's your deal? You didn't grow up in a Christian family." And I want to suggest that you share your story. You could give them the New Testament and say, read this, but read the Old Testament first. That's not a bad thing, but I want to say there's something simpler and kind of more compelling, which is your experience of the Bible. Tell them that. Okay, let me say it in other terms more simply. Share your story about before you met Jesus, how you met Jesus, and what life's been like after you met Jesus. Just share your story. They've come to love you, which is why they're asking you. And so, because it's different if you're standing on the Sept town hall doing the walk-up evangelism thing that I said not right now for our church too, then probably don't lead with your story because that person doesn't know you. If anything, I'd lead with just some logical truth about the gospel. But if you're doing the bless thing, then share your story because they have come to trust you as a Jesus follower. So share your story. And a very simple way, tell them about before you met Jesus, when you met Jesus, and what life has been like afterwards. Okay, and you see this, I'm just going to give you two examples. In Acts chapter 26, you see Paul does it. It's very compelling. He's telling one or other ruler about his life before Jesus, when he met Jesus, and what it's been like afterwards. It's very beautiful. You get a sense of it in Luke chapter 8, a few verses from here, where there's a demon-possessed man who's just afflicted by disorder in the world, disordered spiritual things going on for him. And Jesus releases him from that, and he wants to follow Jesus. He thinks, I want more of this guy, rightly so. And he goes to hop in the boat with Jesus to return, and Jesus says, no, I want you to go back to your city and tell them how much God has done. And then it says, he went back and told them how much Jesus had done for them. Very lovely phrase twist there. And I imagine that when he went, he's going to go tell his story. Do you remember me? I'm the guy that used to yell at the back of church. And look at my scars, they're healing up, but I think I'm going to have them for a little while longer, but I don't do it anymore. And freedom, it's just beautiful. How did it happen? Jesus. And what's life like now? It's just, I'm free again. I'm myself in Jesus. Tell your story about what life was like before, how you met Jesus, and what life's been like afterwards. I want to give you a few pointers about telling your story in those ways. Just three things. First of all, try and look for a bit of a theme that matches your walk with Jesus and how you met him. And it'll be different for as many people as there's different in the room. Because you could kind of just use any image or metaphor from the New Testament or make up your own. But try and think, what has been very dear to me? So I'm going to give you a really quick example that doesn't do my story justice. I would say that as a kid growing up, I felt I didn't know my place in the world. I felt like everybody else knew what they were doing in life, and I kind of was kind of trying to catch up, and I could never quite find my voice. I remember standing at a stall at school in kindergarten, waiting to buy something for Mother's Day, and the world just went past me, and people kept on buying stuff, and I kind of couldn't quite get in line. I went back to Mum, and she's like, "You still got money?" I said, "I don't." And that kind of is very much how I felt as a kid, in a lot of ways. But then I went to a Christian scout camp, and they told me the gospel, and I heard God address me in the Bible, and I felt like I still don't know what life's about, but God does, and He is full of truth and grace. And I was captured by that. I went to the man afterwards. I said, "What am I supposed to do?" He said, "Just turn to Jesus tonight." And I turned to Jesus, and since that night, I completely know my place in the world. I love it. Now I stumble along, and I don't take my place in the world, which is supposed to be a humble place. But I know that there is a place in the world for me in Jesus. He's gifted me particularly and has particular ministry and kind of good things for me. I'm rushing through that because I want to move on. But what I'm trying to say is there's a bit of a theme there, right? About purpose, about how do you have knowledge in the world. That's my theme, but yours will be different. And it's worth just reflecting on if you've never done that. What's the kind of one of the big themes of preciousness between you and Jesus? And have a 2-minute story like I just had, and then have a half an hour story for when there's a glass of red wine out as well. And have the, do you know what I mean? Just have it prepped and ready and know your story well enough to just give it at the right moment and bless people. So first of all, have a theme, have a bit of a sense of a theme between you. Secondly, don't get stuck on the conversion moment. Sometimes when we talk about telling our story about becoming a Christian, we just talk all about the moment and how bright the light was, or how great the speaker was, or whatever. And that is really important. But it's important to talk about what life was like before and after as well, because that gives context and shows that this Jesus walks with you out of the moment, not just one bright, shiny moment, but He walks with you and leads you in life. So don't just focus on the conversion moment. And thirdly, I want to say, don't think that your story is boring. Well, let me put it this way: you might think that you're allowed to think your story is boring, your testimony, but it's not, because it's different from mine and it's different from other people. Some people have I used to have demons, a whole legion of them, and now I don't, and I've got the scars to show. In my books, that's a pretty compelling, interesting story. But you might be the person who said, "I just grew up in a Christian house and I've just always known Jesus." I want to know that story. That's really interesting to me. And there's going to be certain temptations and dangers for that person that's different from the demoniac guy. And you shouldn't belittle your story and what God has been doing in your life. So don't do that. And don't talk to the ex-drug addict or something and bang your stories into each other and see how they're both quite beautiful in very different ways so that you know your story better. I want to tell you just really briefly again now about a lady from our church who's just passed away a few days ago. Some of you will know Lola, but some of you won't. Lola Palmer was in her 90s, and I was trying to explain to someone new at our church who Lola is. I said she's kind of our matriarch, kind of just like one of the rock stars of our church, because she's been around for, like, not even joking, maybe 70 of her years here or so, I think 60 or 70 years. Yeah, she became a Christian in my house back in the 50s, I think, in a church service. She's just this very special part of our church. It's very sad we've just lost her. But she was someone who would often pull out her story. I've heard her story a number of times. And I remember her telling me that, she said, "You know, Blake, I went to church for a long time, all my life, but I wasn't a Christian." And that, I'm suddenly interested. I went to church, but I wasn't a Christian. She said, church used to meet in my house. She lived out near Wellington, in New South Wales and Western New South Wales, and she said the minister would come once a month in a wagon. The church would have breakfast in my lounge room, and then he'd do the service after breakfast, because it was just a small country parish. And she said, but I wasn't a Christian at that. And she said it wasn't until I was in my 30s and I came to this church. She said I was sitting on the back pew, which is where I watch TV from now, which is a bit weird. Sitting on the back pew in my house, listening to the minister out the front, other than my house, and he was praying for someone. And she said, Lola said that she'd lost a child, that she had a stillborn child just a few months prior. And she said, as the minister prayed for this person, it was lovely because he was praying for that person there, but God was using that prayer for me. God was using that prayer to speak to Lola particularly, even though it was designed for someone else. And she said, I just knew God was real and he was mine and he was for me at that point and he was going to get me through. She said at that point when I really became a Christian. And since then, and she would talk about how certain her faith was and how much Jesus loved her. And she had this kind of almost playfulness about her and her relationship with Jesus that was such a compelling thing to hear before she became a Christian, how she became a Christian, and what life was like afterwards. And I want to encourage you, if you don't have that before, during, and after story ready to go, then it'll do you beautiful favors, partly for your own faith. It just encourages you to put your finger on those stories. I want you to think this week. Don't let it go longer than a week, because it won't happen really if you let it go longer than a week. Find your story so that you're ready to tell it. And I want to encourage you to ask each other this coming week, or maybe at the curry night, give each other a week to prep, to be asking people, hey, what is your story? I know you, but I don't know how you became a Christian. Not how you became a Christian. I don't know your story exactly, because it's not just about how you became. There you go. Last thing to say is, yes, just to wrap the whole series up, the Blessed series about wanting to share our faith in a gentle and a respectful way, but forthright, and really we do want to share our faith. It's good news. There's a very wise seminar leader that I went to a seminar on sharing of faith, and they said it's very easy, evangelism, which is sharing the gospel. All you have to do is have integrity. Have integrity. Really be a Christian who really is following Jesus and has your heart with him. Is following him, is laying down your mistakes with Jesus as you go and knowing that he leads you forward out of mistakes. Really be a Christian and really be a good friend. Do it properly. Love people. Don't give up on them when they're a bit annoying. Kind of go with it. And he said, there is almost nothing else you need to do. Just love Jesus and love love God, love your neighbor, and it will come out. They'll ask you to share the gospel. So, and here's a bit of a challenge for you as let's just think about which one am I kind of dropping the ball on at the moment? Am I kind of lacking in my faith in Jesus and knowing him and knowing what my questions are for him and what's hard for me? Or am I lacking on being a good friend? Maybe I just don't have any friends because I'm too busy with church stuff. I'd say do less church stuff. I'll take you off the roster if you want. We only just published it last week, but I'm up for taking you off the roster if you want to be a better friend for people. Love God and love your neighbors. Let me leave this tomorrow.